I was working as a legal aid attorney in New York City. On Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, I was off to work as I always did, heading towards the subway and taking the train down to 90 Church Street, across the street from the World Trade Center. People learned that the subways had stopped. By the time I returned home, I had learned what had happened, that a plane had hit the World Trade Center, and then a little while later, a second plane hit the World Trade Center. We were all in shock. An image that will never leave my mind. It was in the afternoon, my cousin and I, we walked downtown, and we finally ended up not too far from the World Trade Center. And we saw this massive plume of smoke coming from the ground. It was dark, it was ominous. I've never seen something so scary in my life, and it was noxious. Even though we were a few blocks away, you could smell it, and it was horrific. And the sight that I saw that I will never forget is all these police officers and all these fire emergency workers running towards this. They had lost their brethren. They had lost their brothers and sisters hours before. And they were going to fight this fire and to take it and control it. And I've never seen such courage in my life.
On September 11th, 2001, I was at a small military base in Pensacola, Florida. At that point, I had been in the United States Marine Corps for about 3 months. I was 18 years old, and I distinctly remember that they locked down the small base that we were at. And as we're all watching the towers come down, it occurred to me that we are all United States Marines and that we're all going to go to war at some point.
On September 11th, 2001, my dad and I loaded up a rented car with all of my belongings because that was the day that I was driving from Washington, D.C., where my parents lived, to Hanover, New Hampshire, where I was about to start school as a college student. Before we got in the car, we heard some news about what was happening, that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. But we didn't know the size of the plane, we didn't know just how catastrophic it was. So as we were driving up the entire time in silence, listening to the news and the reactions and what was happening. That was the same day, actually, September 11th, that Bob Dylan released his new album. And my dad and I are both big Bob Dylan fans, so just to try to escape the horrific reality we knew we were living through, we bought the album and we listened to it for the rest of the ride up.
I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just about to begin my master's program. I heard the news that something had happened in New York, and I wasn't sure what to make of it. On that day, I just remember the sense of confusion, the pain, the heartache, the sense that we are all in it together. I remember the solidarity. I remember the people going out into their yards with signs, with American flags. And although there had been this attack, this tragedy, this incredible loss, united as a world, because I remember the messages of support and sympathy came in from all over the world. As much as I remember the heartbreak, I remember the unity.
9/11 had a direct impact on me also, because a month after 9/11, I received my offer to join the Foreign Service, and a few months later, I moved to Washington, D.C. and started training. In the years following, I went to Iraq, I went to Afghanistan, I went to Pakistan. I worked on counterterrorism issues back in Washington, D.C., and I had a range of experiences that were driven by American foreign policy and the events that happened after 9/11. It's had a huge influence, I think, on all diplomats, because we've realized the importance of diplomacy.
Part of the reason that I decided to become a diplomat after I finished my military service is because I saw firsthand how these types of things can be prevented at the diplomatic level, so future military service members don't need to pay the ultimate sacrifice with their lives if we can resolve some of our disagreements and issues at the diplomatic level before it gets to the point where someone decides that they need to use violence as a means towards their ends.
With our partners here in Algeria and others, and so I've taken that to heart. And I think that's one of the reasons I've become somebody who specializes in cultural diplomacy, someone who tries to build bridges between the American people and the peoples of the world.
What really strikes me about that time is my first Arabic class. And my teacher at that time, who later became a good friend, said something that I think was really quite profound. He said that countries in the Middle East and North Africa have been dealing with terrorism at home and have dealt with this issue for some time, including Algeria. And they have learned what it means to sacrifice and to succeed in the fight against terrorism. We honor the sacrifices of the Algerians, in particular in the 90s, that lived through the dark decade. And so it's very fitting today that 20 years later, on this day, after studying the Middle East, living in many countries, that I'm here in Algeria, which has really succeeded in this fight. And together with Algeria in this partnership, we are working to continue to win in this fight against terrorism.